a sickly child, a grieving mother, and the woman who oversaw the birth of a nation. Queen Anne was the last Stuart monarch. Her reign was both tragic and transformative. Welcome to the series. I make documentaries about the royals, including Mary, Queen of Scots, and Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. But today we are looking at a Queen of Great Britain from 1702 to 1714. Religious conflict, war with France, and the ongoing struggle between Catholics and Protestants dominated the late 17th and early 18th century Britain. And through it all, there was the looming question of succession. But thanks be to God, both mother and child are well, and both are christened Protestants. The midwife is a strict Presbyterian, but fears not, but she will come to church. Reportedly, he was a harsh disciplinarian, and Anne was often ill, suffering from smallpox, convulsions, and a perforated eardrum. It was rumored that they shared a bed until Mary's death in 1694. And following that, Anne never slept alone. And King William III of Bling when Mary ascended to the throne upon their father's death. Following the Glorious Revolution of 1688, Mary and Anne's father, who had become James II, fled to Normandy in disguise. Although she was a constitutional monarch, Anne had little real power. James II ruled as an absolute monarch and bypassed the parliament altogether. He governed by order and encouraged the arts and sciences. And her nephew, Frederick IV of Denmark, inherited the Swedish throne. Anne did not recognize Frederick's claim, and reportedly said, "A low church, Lutheran, no, never." In 1704, Anne's only surviving son, the Elect of Hanover, died, leaving her daughter Sophia as the heir presumptive. In 1705, she was created Princess of Wales. The same year, Anne's sister-in-law, Queen Mary, died, and an inheritor, jewels, among them were the crown jewels of Bling, which had been kept safe during the previous monarch's flight from London. However, he alienated many of his subjects by promoting Catholics to positions of power and attempting to reintroduce Catholicism as a state religion. She went so far as to have a special chair built with armrests to prevent any surprise attacks. But the greatest threat to her health came from those closest to her. In 1714, Queen Anne's personal secretary, Lady Greater-than, and one of Anne's ladies-in-waiting, Mrs. Montgomery, conspired to kill the Queen by throwing her into a smallpox-infected sewer. Both women were executed for treason. These actions would ultimately lead to the First English War of Succession, which saw the throne contested by James II's son, the Old Pretender, James Francis Edward Stuart, who was nicknamed the Two-Faced Monarch, and Anne's son, the Young Pretender, James Francis Edward Stuart, also known as Bonnie, Prince Charlie. A group of 7 noblemen helped him escape, and they became known as the Merry Monarch 7. Upon ascending to the throne, Anne promised to preserve the Protestant faith, and was very well liked by the people. This war pitted her against her cousin, Philip V, who was the grandson of her great-grandfather, King Philip III of Spain. Anne had supported her cousin's claim to the Spanish throne, but once it became apparent that he intended to wage war against her, Anne switched sides and fought against him. Although she was Queen of Bling, Anne didn't hold the title Queen of England until 1707. That year, the Acts of Union united the kingdoms of Bling and England, creating a new entity known as Great Britain. Anne became the first monarch of this new realm, and her title was changed accordingly. Parliament passed the Act of Settlement, which stipulated that if she died without issue, the throne would pass to her daughter Sophia of Hanover, and in default of issue, to Sophia's daughter, an Electress of Hanover. This act excluded Catholics from ever taking the throne again, and so any hopes that Anne's half-brother, James the Old Pretender, might one day rule were dashed. When the deposed king reached Normandy, he was given a horse saddle specially made so he could ride while sitting down. He used the saddle for the rest of his life, and it is now held at the Palace of Holyrood House in Edinburgh. Instead, she was attended by 4 women at a time, 2 of whom slept in her bed. Smallpox left her with a permanent disfigurement, which included a depressed nasal bridge, scarred skin around her mouth and eyes, and a pronounced widow's peak. She was also partially deaf. This poor health continued throughout her life, and she suffered from painful corns, gout, diarrhea, bladder problems, and painful cysts, among other ailments. One contemporary said of her looks, she had nothing beautiful about her except her teeth, which were very fine and regular. Another described her complexion as being like a black. Despite her difficult childhood, she grew up with a sunny disposition and was known for her wit and sense of humor. Anne was very fond of dancing, music, art, and literature, and was particularly attached to horses. Clearly, even at this early stage, there was pressure to raise him in the Protestant faith. The reason for his conversion is not entirely clear, but it may have been because he married a Catholic woman named Maria of who was also the godmother of Anne's future husband, Prince George of Denmark, and England with her husband, William of Orange, as joint monarch. Mary was initially popular with the people of Bling, but she was unable to conceive a child, which led many to believe that she was barren. Because of this, there were rumblings about whether she should be replaced by her younger sister, Anne, who was married to the Danish prince, George of Denmark. Anne and George had 7 children, but all but one died in infancy. Their surviving daughter was named Sophia, so Anne found herself in a difficult position. Although she had produced a living child, she was still seen as being childless, because none of her children except Sophia were old enough to be considered legitimate heirs to the throne. This caused tension in the royal court, especially after a visit from her father, James II, who reportedly told Anne, "You have brought us nothing but shame and disappointment. Your sister's children are the only hope left of our family." Or perhaps it was because he felt isolated and unwanted by his own family. Either way, it caused a bit of an issue because at the time, the Church of England was opposed to Catholicism. As the last Stuart monarch, would Anne be able to secure her dynasty's future, or would it end with her? Anne's life was marked by tragedy, both on a personal level and for the country she ruled. So let's go back to the beginning. Anne was born in 1665 in the Palace of St. James in London. She was the second daughter of James, Duke of York, and his wife Anne Hyde. At this point, her father was second in line to the throne after his older brother, Charles II, and her family were staunch Protestants. But according to some reports, their mother wanted them to convert to Catholicism instead. And Hyde died when Mary was 2, and Anne was only 11 months old. And soon after, her father married his new wife Maria of Modena, who became the girl's stepmother. The Duke of York was a strict parent, and once his second wife took over the role of governess, Anne and Mary were sent to sleep in separate rooms and were not allowed to see each other. They were raised separately by their parents until they were reunited at court in 1682, while Anne's father was raised as a Protestant. He converted to Catholicism later in life, which caused a bit of a stir in England. Upon Anne's birth, her father wrote to his brother, the king, saying, "My last night was very uneasy." Anne was indeed baptized a Protestant, and so was her sister. Mary Anne was primarily raised by her father and a succession of nurses. In 1682, she was reunited with her sister at court, and the sisters were inseparable throughout their lives. Anne's sister married William of Orange, who became the Prince Consort of Bling. James II tried to reclaim the throne but failed. His daughter Mary became Queen Mary II of Bling. When Mary died in 1694, Anne became Queen of Bling and co-monarch with her father, who had reclaimed the throne. James II died in 1701, leaving the throne to Anne, who became the Queen of Bling in Scotland. During Anne's reign, the War of the Spanish Succession was fought. The Anglo-Dutch War broke out in 1702 and lasted until 1713. During the conflict, Anne's cousin, King George I of Sweden, died by this time. Anne had developed a fear of assassination. This is Queen Anne, the last of the Stuarts. She was born Princess Anne of Great Britain, the second child of King James II and his wife. The so-called two-faced monarch, Mary of the soon-to-be King James II, abandoning the little girl behind in what would be a deeply traumatic event for the princess. We can see that this has left its mark on her face. Her older half-sister, Mary II, became Queen of Bling, and Anne was briefly Queen of Fun. She herself was forced to witness the public humiliation of her family name, but she also witnessed the coronation of her sister and brother-in-law, who ruled jointly as joint monarchs, and now dropped to second in line. And within 3 years, Mary was dead. William was devastated and threw himself into his work. Anne went into deep mourning and chose not to leave the house. This was a period of profound sadness for Anne. When Mary of Modena died in 1694, Anne was finally reconciled with her. Soon afterwards, Anne was able to forgive her father, too, although they never met again. They did, however, correspond regularly. As their relationship improved, Anne referred to James as "my father" in her letters, a stark contrast to the icy tone of her correspondence with him while he was king. 5 months later, her only surviving child, Prince William, died at the age of 11. The grief nearly broke her. "What signifies a crown to me who have no health, no issue, no friends? All I can do is to look with an aching heart on those about me enjoying themselves, whilst I must stand by and be miserable." And this was a pattern that would continue into her reign. Feeling that she wasn't cut out to be a mother, Anne had given up on having any more children long before this final devastating blow. It was difficult for her to adjust to her new responsibilities as the new monarch. She was prone to depression, unable to escape her grief and the lonely prospect of ruling without an heir. When the famous racehorse, the Godolphin Arabian, arrived in England in 1730, it was bought by Anne's groom, who covered the horse's transportation costs with money that he borrowed from a friend. The Tories favoured closer ties with France in the Catholic League, while the Whigs wanted to maintain ties with the Dutch Republic and the Grand Alliance. The Tories accused the Whigs of disloyalty and the Whigs accused the Tories of Catholicism. These competing factions caused instability and made governing a real challenge. That friend was none other than the Earl of Good. She also had a close relationship with the Earl of Halifax, who served as Lord President of the Council, and from this association, the horse took its name. The Godolphin Arabian is considered to be one of the most important racehorses in history, and its bloodline continues to thrive today. By all accounts, Anne was a hard worker and a conscientious monarch. She had never been particularly close to Mary, but it seemed clear that her sister had finally come to accept her and their relationship was improving. So Anne was not only grieving for her sibling, but for the loss of the only family member with whom she had ever really felt close. But as a last Stuart, Anne had no sympathy for the Scottish cause. Anne supported the claims of the Archduke Charles of Austria to the Spanish throne and was a great admirer of the general who led the Allied armies to victory, John Churchill, Duke of Monarch. While she was fond of Scotland and visited frequently, she had no intention of extending the Union northwards. It was an unprecedented situation and raised questions over their legitimacy. Once settled in her role, Anne did make efforts to produce an heir, but these attempts proved unsuccessful. Just 5 years into her reign, she gave up hope of ever having a child and turned to governing. She was the supreme governor of the Church of England, holding the title and right of her own choosing, and she was the absolute ruler of a growing empire. And lady-in-waiting Sarah Churchill, whose husband, John Churchill, Duke of Marlborough, was elevated to the position of Master of the Horse, something he held until his death in 1722, a year after the death of her sister, and went into deep mourning again for her father. And Ireland against France, Spain, and their allies across Europe and the Americas. But despite her grueling schedule, Anne still made time for her beloved horses. She rode side saddle and hunted with a pack of beagles that she kept at Kensington Palace. He died in 1701. His first wife, Anne of Denmark, had died in 1701. The couple had been married for 53 years, and their shared grief brought them closer together in their twilight years. Now unmourned for him, too, with her chief advisor gone and her relationship with her sister at its most distant, Anne found herself increasingly isolated. When Anne was just 3 years old, her mother fled Normandy with her husband and Anne's older brother Mary II, and her husband, William III of Orange, took the crown, making an heir apparent. But Anne was not in England. She was on holiday in Italy when news of the revolution reached her. In total, Anne suffered 17 pregnancies. 9 failed to reach full term and 6 resulted in stillbirths. One set of twins, a boy and a girl, died after only a few hours. Another set of twins, both boys, died after only a few weeks. 2 more sons died in infancy. Only one of her children lived past the age of 11, so in some sense she was also his prisoner. Although she liked her sister, they had very different personalities and were not particularly close. And Anne felt that Mary might well use her position to push her further down the line of succession. But it's not the only trauma she will endure. By all accounts, Anne was a bright, inquisitive, and spirited child, perhaps too much so for the austere court of her day. According to one story, when she was around 8 years old, Anne was sent to kneel in the corner for being imp. She did so until her legs buckled beneath her. Then, seeing that her punishment had gone far enough, she rose from her kneeling and told her governess, "I am the king's daughter and you are only my governess." And indeed, she would one day become queen. Her path to the throne would begin in 1688 when England experienced a bloodless revolution, which saw her father, James II, flee to Normandy in disguise, leaving the throne vacant, and returned to England where she watched as her father's statues were torn down, his regalia destroyed and his portrait slashed or burned. Although Anne had been a strong supporter of the revolution and her father's removal, she knew that she owed her position as heir to him. In 1694, Mary gave birth to a son, creating a whole new line of succession. As if losing her sister was not enough. On top of this, Anne lost her closest confidant. And then things got worse because Anne had never really gotten over her falling out with her mother. But there was no time limit on the length of her mourning. By the time of her accession, she was exhausted by the repeated grief. On July 1702, at the age of 47, Queen Anne gave birth to a stillborn son. In her teens, she wrote to her friend Lady Marlborough, "I have lost all the pleasures of this life, which were only in my looks and could never be returned but by my dear Will." For years, and felt that she had nothing to offer her people except misery, and she was unable to escape her grief. The joy of accession was short-lived. Historians debate whether or not she ever recovered from the death of her only child, but while she was able to throw herself into her duties, her health remained poor and she was often incapacitated by migraines and bouts of melancholy. While her sister Mary had been forced to share power with her husband and enjoyed complete autonomy, she reigned over a nation that was locked in a bitter war with France, which pitted England, Scotland. Her love of horses would leave a legacy. The Tory versus Whig divide dominated Anne's relationship with Parliament. But despite these difficulties, Anne had a good working relationship with several key figures in Parliament, including her First Minister Spencer Compton, Earl of Wilmington. It was during Anne's reign that England and Scotland were united with the coming into effect of the Acts of Union, which created the Kingdom of Great Britain. She presided over the War of the Spanish Succession, which pitted the Grand Alliance against France, Spain, and their allies. Her Majesty's servants were up to their usual tricks once again, spreading vicious rumors about my loyalty to His Majesty. They told him that I was conspiring with France to dethrone him. Make sure to hit that subscribe button, so you never miss an exciting episode. And while he was away fighting the French, they said that I had invited the French king to invade and occupy England. She was raised in the shadow of her older sister, the beautiful Mary, knowing that she would likely never be queen. Sarah became increasingly controlling of Anne, dominating her every waking moment and preventing her from seeing anyone else. Another lady-in-waiting, Abigail Masham, had been watching this toxic relationship unfold with great interest. Anne's ladies-in-waiting were known for their petty squabbles and backstabbing. If they were busy spreading rumors about each other's fidelity or plotting to take each other's places at court, they were scheming to get the upper hand on the next royal commission or trying to outshine the other with their fancy clothes. She became the first monarch of the new kingdom of Great Britain, and her statue now stands proudly in Parliament Square in London to commemorate this historic achievement. Unfortunately, Abigail was not as loyal as Sarah had been, and she took advantage of the Queen's weakened state to get what she wanted. Her ladies-in-waiting were still plotting against each other, and Abigail's hold on the Queen's favor was starting to slip. To make matters worse, England was at war with France and the Spanish, and the future of the kingdom was looking uncertain, and needed her court to be a source of strength and support. But instead she was surrounded by backstabbing, jealousy, and deceit. George had no real connection to England, and he was unable to speak or read English. The new king was a foreigner who knew little to nothing about England, and this created a sense of uncertainty about the future of the kingdom. However, despite the challenges that lay ahead, the English people were excited to see what the future would hold, and what new opportunities would arise under the rule of a new monarch. This caused a great deal of resentment among the English people, who felt that they had lost their say in who would be their next monarch. A woman who was born into privilege but never felt like she truly belonged. She was mocked by her peers for her looks and ridiculed by her subjects for her personality. And while you're there, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you'll never miss an exciting episode. I would also like to take a moment to say a special thank you to our supporters whose names you can see on screen right now. I'll see you next time. But she persevered and made her mark on the world, despite the many obstacles in her path. She started making decisions on Anne's behalf without consulting her, and even began to control the Queen's household staff. She may have been the silent queen, but her impact was anything but. Anne's ladies-in-waiting were furious about this and plotted to get Abigail fired. She was a woman of contradictions, a powerful monarch with a weak personality, a loving sister whose own sibling wished her dead, a devoted friend whose closest companion would betray her, a fashion-forward trendsetter who suffered from crippling gout, a woman who was both pious and immoral. She was also a constitutional monarch who shaped the course of British history and established a precedent for the role of the monarchy in a democracy. However, they didn't realize that she was secretly having an affair with the Queen's favorite minister, Harley, Earl of Oxford. Anne's ladies-in-waiting were willing to do whatever it took to get ahead, even if it meant backstabbing their friends and spreading rumors about each other. In the midst of this chaos, Anne was determined to make her mark on history by uniting England and Scotland into the Kingdom of Great Britain, and he was helping her climb the ranks of power. Despite the many obstacles in her path, she never gave up on her dream of creating a united kingdom. This is why she is remembered as one of the most important figures in British history. It was a constant game of one-upmanship, and they were unafraid to use any means necessary to get ahead. She was a master manipulator and had been waiting for her chance to take Sarah's place as Anne's closest confidant. She worked hard to keep England safe and secure, and she never gave up hope that things would get better. But unfortunately, her health took a turn for the worse, and she died on August 1, 1714, at the age of 49. With Sarah out of the picture, it didn't take long for Abigail to move into Sarah's old role. She became the only person who could get through to Anne, and the rest is history. Her ladies-in-waiting were devastated to lose their beloved monarch, and many of them were accused of hastening Anne's death by their constant scheming and backstabbing. As the country mourned the loss of their queen, there was also a sense of relief that her difficult and volatile personality was no longer a part of their lives. She would even bully Anne's other ladies-in-waiting and force them to leave the court if they didn't agree with her. As the years went on, Sarah's behavior became more and more erratic, and she eventually lost Anne's trust. For centuries, the two countries had been at odds, constantly fighting each other, and it was taking a toll on the stability of the realm. However, Anne saw an opportunity to change everything when the Scottish Parliament voted to accept a Bill of Rights that would make her their queen. This was a chance to finally unite the two countries under one monarch and create a single parliament. After a dramatic confrontation in 1710, the two women's friendship ended and Sarah was banished from the court. Many members of the English Parliament were against the notion of sharing power with the Scots, and some powerful nobles were worried that it would diminish their status if the Scottish nobility were given positions in the English Parliament. Despite all the naysayers, Anne was determined to make this work. She knew that by creating a single parliament, England and Scotland would be united, and they would be able to present a united front against their enemies. Plus, it would make her job as monarch much easier if she had only one parliament to deal with instead of two. From a young age, Anne had a difficult temperament and was prone to depression. In her early teens, she began having violent mood swings and couldn't be left alone without a nurse to look after her. But one thing that always cheered her up was spending time with her close friend, Sarah Churchill, Duchess of Monmouth. They even claimed that I was receiving secret payments from the French government. Honestly, sometimes I don't know what I did to deserve such treatment. Hi everyone, welcome to this house. Today we are exploring the life of the last Stuart monarch, Queen Anne of England, Scotland and Ireland. Anne was born on November 6, 1665, just 5 months after her parents. King Charles II and his wife, the Portuguese Infanta Catherine of Braganza, were married. Sarah had been one of Anne's ladies-in-waiting since the Queen was a child, and the two quickly formed an intense bond. Sarah knew exactly how to cheer Anne up when she was depressed, and she was always there to comfort the Queen when she was feeling down. In turn, Anne trusted Sarah completely and listened to her advice on all matters, both personal and political. When Anne ascended to the throne in 1702, upon the death of her sister Mary, Sarah became her most trusted advisor. She was the only person to whom Anne would listen when no one else could get through to her, and she was also the only person who could make the Queen laugh when she was in one of her infamous bad moods. Unfortunately, this intense relationship turned into a toxic one. But this wasn't the end of the story. The palace corridors were filled with whispers and gossip as the Queen's inner circle shifted and changed. Despite all the drama happening around her, Anne's mind was focused on the task at hand, uniting England and Scotland into one kingdom. But there was a lot of opposition to this idea. With the help of her counselors, Anne managed to convince the English Parliament to accept the Bill of Rights and unite the two countries. As the years passed, Anne's health began to deteriorate and she became increasingly reliant on her close friend, Abigail Masham. As Anne's health continued to decline, the drama at court only intensified. Despite all the chaos around her, Anne remained focused on her duty as monarch. The news of Anne's death sent shockwaves throughout the kingdom. With Anne's death, the Stuart dynasty came to an end, and the crown passed to Anne's cousin, George I, who was living in exile in Hanover, Germany. The transition of power from the Stuarts to the House of Hanover marked a significant turning point in English history. When we think of Queen Anne, it's hard not to feel a sense of sympathy for her. Behind the facade of the glittering court, there was a constant struggle for power and influence. In the end, it was Anne's determination and resilience that allowed her to succeed where others had failed. Anne was truly a tragic figure. In the end, it was Anne's inner strength and determination that allowed her to succeed where others had failed. Thank you all so much for watching. Which fact about Queen Anne did you find the most interesting? Let me know down below in the comments section.